Get out. This house belongs to me now. Mike's voice boomed through our childhood home as he threw another box of my belongings onto the front lawn. I stood there, watching 30 years of memories scatter across the grass like fallen leaves. My name is Emily Parker, and at 35, I was being evicted from my childhood home by my own brother. The house where we'd grown up, where our grandfather had raised us after our parents' accident, was now apparently his alone. "You can't do this, Mike," I said, keeping my voice steady despite the anger building inside me. "Grandpa left this house to both of us." He sneered, his face twisted with the same arrogance he'd worn since becoming a successful real estate agent. "Actually, I can. The deed's in my name now. Grandpa signed it over to me before he died. You were too busy with your nature conservation work to care about the family property anyway." I watched as he tossed my old photo albums onto the growing pile. 20 years of wildlife photography scattered across the lawn, pictures of endangered species I'd documented, of habitats I'd helped protect. Work that Grandpa had always supported, even if Mike dismissed it as a waste of time. "Besides," he continued, "I have plans for this place. The land alone is worth millions to developers. Time to tear down this old house and build something worthwhile." My heart stopped. Tear down the house? The beautiful Victorian home our grandfather had lovingly restored? The gardens he tended until his last days? I looked at the ancient oak tree where our tire swings still hum, remembering how Grandpa used to push us both, telling us stories about the land's history. "You know that's not what Grandpa wanted," I said, bending down to pick up a fallen photograph. It was one of the last pictures taken of Grandpa, standing proudly in front of his beloved rose garden. He wanted this place preserved. Mike laughed, the sound harsh and unfamiliar. When had my brother become this person? What Grandpa wanted doesn't matter anymore. He's gone, and I'm making the decisions now. You have until sunset to get your stuff and leave. I gathered my belongings quietly, methodically, while Mike stood on the porch watching with satisfaction. He didn't help, didn't offer boxes or even trash bags for the mess he'd made. The brother who once helped me build fairy houses in the garden now couldn't even show basic human decency. As I packed my car, a memory surfaced, Grandpa's last Christmas with us, just 6 months ago. He'd been unusually insistent about showing me something in the basement, despite Mike's attempts to distract him with talk about property values and development opportunities. "The heart of this house isn't in the walls, Emmy," Grandpa had said, his weathered hand patting the old safe hidden behind years of storage. "It's in the truth we preserve." I hadn't understood then. I'd been too focused on documenting the migration patterns of endangered butterflies in the nearby forest. But now, watching Mike gloat from the porch of our childhood home, Grandpa's words took on new meaning. "You might want to check the basement safe before you start demolition," I called out, loading the last box into my car. Grandpa always said this house held more than just memories. Mike's smug expression faltered for just a moment. "What are you talking about? There's nothing in that old safe." "I already checked." I smiled, starting my car. "Did you check with the right combination? The one Grandpa used to sing to us when we were kids. The one about the butterflies and the ancient oak tree." The color drained from Mike's face. He'd always hated those nature songs, had always rushed inside when Grandpa started singing about the wildlife on our property. But I had listened, had learned every word, every number hidden in those simple verses. "You're lying," he called after me as I backed down the driveway. "You're just trying to save this worthless old house." I didn't respond, just waved as I drove away. Let him wonder. Let him worry. Grandpa had always said timing was everything, whether you were photographing an elusive species or revealing an uncomfortable truth. That night, as I settled into my small apartment, I pulled out my phone and sent a single text to the local historical society. "It's time. Check your email for Grandpa Parker's documentation." Then I waited, knowing that Mike's plans for our childhood home were about to hit an unexpected snag. Grandpa might be gone, but his legacy was about to make itself known in ways my brother never saw coming. 3 weeks after Mike kicked me out, I sat in my apartment reviewing the emails flooding my inbox. The Historical Society had been busy, and their findings were exactly what Grandpa had prepared me for. My phone buzzed, Mike's name flashing on the screen. I'd ignore his previous 15 calls, but this time I answered. "What did you do?" His voice was shaking with rage. "Some people from the Historical Society are here." They're talking about protected status and historical significance. They have documents, Emily. Documents with Grandpa's signature. I smiled, remembering the afternoon Grandpa had signed those papers. Oh, were they finally doing the inspection? Grandpa arranged that months ago. They're saying this house is part of the Underground Railroad, that there are preserved tunnels under the property. They're claiming it's a historical landmark. Mike's voice cracked. The development company is pulling out of the deal. Interesting. I replied calmly. Did you check the basement safe yet? The combination is in Grandpa's butterfly song, the one you never bothered to learn. The line went quiet for a moment. You knew about this all along, didn't you? While I was making plans, signing contracts, you knew. Grandpa tried to tell you many times, Mike, but you were too busy planning to tear down his life's work to listen. Did you know he spent 30 years documenting the house's history? That he worked with historians to verify every detail about its role in helping people escape to freedom? I heard something crash on his end of the line. This is ridiculous. I'll fight this. I'll contest the historical status. Good luck with that. Grandpa's documentation is thorough. He didn't just preserve the house, Mike. He preserved the truth. After hanging up, I pulled out the copy of the papers Grandpa had given me that last Christmas. The original documents were safely stored with the Historical Society, but I kept this copy as a reminder of his foresight. The next day, I drove past our childhood home to find it surrounded by historians and preservationists. They were examining the architecture, taking photographs, measuring the entrance to the underground tunnels. Mike stood on the porch, his face pale as he watched his development dreams crumble. One of the historians spotted me and waved. Miss Parker, your grandfather's records are remarkable. The detailed maps of the tunnel system, the documented accounts of the families who passed through. This is a significant historical find. Mike's head snapped up at that, his eyes meeting mine with a mix of fury and disbelief. I could almost see him remembering all those times he'd mocked Grandpa's obsession with the house's history, all the times he dismissed our grandfather's stories as silly tales. The butterfly garden makes sense now, the historian continued excitedly. Your grandfather's notes explain how the original owners used butterfly patterns to mark safe houses. Fascinating how he maintained that tradition. I nodded, thinking of all the hours Grandpa had spent teaching me about the butterflies, singing that song that contained more than just a safe combination. Every verse had been a piece of our home's history, a code that Mike had been too impatient to decipher. As I turned to leave, Mike rushed down from the porch. This isn't over, Emily. You can't just turn our house into some kind of museum. I didn't do anything, Mike. Grandpa did this. He protected his home long before you planned to destroy it. Maybe if you'd spent less time calculating property values and more time listening to his stories, you'd have known that. Looking at my brother's angry face, I felt a mixture of sadness and vindication. The house would be preserved now, protected from development just as Grandpa had wanted. His legacy wouldn't end with luxury condos and parking lots. You know what the irony is? I added, pausing at my car. If you bothered to check the safe, you'd have found that Grandpa left something for both of us. But I guess you'll never know what that was now. I drove away, leaving Mike standing in the middle of our childhood lawn, surrounded by historians documenting every inch of the home he planned to demolish. In my rearview mirror, I could see him staring after my car, probably wondering what else he'd missed while he was busy planning to erase our family's history. That evening, as I sat in my apartment looking through old family photos, I found my favorite picture of Grandpa in his butterfly garden. On the back, in his shaky handwriting, was a note I'd never noticed before. Sometimes the smallest creatures leave the biggest legacy. Keep watching, Emmy. Keep protecting what matters. I smiled, knowing that's exactly what I'd done. A month later, I stood in front of our childhood home, watching as workers carefully installed the historical landmark plaque. The Parker House. Established 1859, it read, followed by a brief description of its significance in the Underground Railroad. Below that, in smaller text, preserved by Thomas Parker in memory of those who sought freedom. Mike hadn't spoken to me since the Historical Society's inspection. According to our neighbors, he'd moved into a downtown apartment, his dreams of luxury development profits shattered by Grandpa's decades of careful documentation. Ms. Parker. A voice called from behind me. I turned to find Miss Thompson, the Historical Society's director, holding a familiar-looking metal box. We found this in the safe during our documentation process. Your grandfather left specific instructions that it should be opened only when both his grandchildren were present. I stared at the box, remembering Grandpa's knowing smile that last Christmas. Have you contacted my brother? She nodded. He's agreed to meet us here this afternoon. Perhaps you'd like to stay. 3 hours later, Mike's BMW pulled into the driveway. He looked different, tired, less polished than usual. The arrogant real estate agent facade had cracked, revealing something of my childhood brother underneath. Let's get this over with, he muttered, avoiding my eyes as we gathered in Grandpa's study. The room remained exactly as it had been, now protected as part of the historical site. Miss Thompson placed the box on Grandpa's old desk and stepped back. I'll give you two some privacy. The combination is in the butterfly song, I finished quietly. Mike's jaw tightened at the mention of it. Once we were alone, I began to sing softly, the way Grandpa had taught me. Monarchs in the garden high, 4 wings touching summer sky. Each verse contained numbers, hidden in plain sight all these years. The safe clicked open. Inside, we found 2 envelopes and a smaller wooden box. The first envelope contained a letter in Grandpa's handwriting. My dear Emily and Michael, if you're reading this, then the house's true history has been revealed. Emily, you understood what needed protecting, not just the buildings and butterflies, but the stories and sacrifices made within these walls. Michael, you saw the financial value, but missed the true worth of our family's legacy. But this house was never meant to divide you. It was meant to teach you both something about preservation, of history, of family, and of what matters most. Love, Grandpa. Mike's hands trembled as he opened the second envelope. Inside were 2 sets of documents, property deeds for land adjacent to the house, 1 in each of our names. He bought the surrounding properties, Mike whispered, studying the papers. 50 acres each. Protected land, I added, reading my copy, can't be developed, but can be used for historical education or environmental conservation. The wooden box held 2 keys and another note. The land is your inheritance, but what you build on it is your legacy. Choose wisely. Mike sank into Grandpa's old leather chair, the same one he dismissed as worthless when planning to clear out the house. All this time, he said softly, I thought Grandpa was just being sentimental, holding onto an old house and telling stories about butterflies. But he was building something bigger. He was protecting something bigger, I corrected. He wanted us to understand that some things are worth more than money. For the first time since this all began, Mike looked at me without anger. I really messed up, didn't I? I nodded, but felt the hard edge of my resentment softening. You did. But maybe it's not too late to fix it. Over the next few hours, we talked, really talked, for the first time in years, about Grandpa's vision, about the importance of preservation, about how we'd grown so far apart. The Historical Society had plans to turn the house into a museum, focusing on both its Underground Railroad history and its environmental significance. They'll need a business manager, I mentioned casually, someone who understands property management and can handle the financial side of running a historical site. Mike looked up sharply. You think they'd consider? Why not? You know this house better than anyone. Besides, I smiled. I could use help developing my land into a butterfly sanctuary and educational center. Someone with experience in property planning. 6 months later, I stood in my newly established butterfly garden, watching visitors explore the educational trails Mike had helped design. Our childhood home had become a respected historical site, drawing school groups and tourists eager to learn about its unique past. Mike, now the museum's business manager, had found his calling in historical property preservation. He even started learning Grandpa's butterfly songs, though he still mixed up the verses sometimes. Looking at the restored Parker House, with its fresh paint and carefully preserved gardens, I thought about legacy, not just of buildings and land, but of lessons learned and bridges rebuilt. Grandpa had known all along that the house would either divide or unite us. In the end, it had done both, broken us apart, only to bring us back together, stronger than before.